FAA dismissed microbursts as theoretical paranoia until Delta 191 crashed and 137 people died. August 2, 1985. Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. The Boeing 727 fell 700 feet in 7 seconds, slammed into a car on Highway 114, killing the driver instantly, then cartwheeled through 2 water tanks before exploding into a fireball that could be seen from downtown Dallas. All because federal authorities had spent 5 years dismissing wind shear detection as unnecessary expensive technology solving a problem that didn't really exist. The mathematics of meteorological murder were already forming in the thunderstorm cell north of the airport. 40,000 feet above Texas, supercooled raindrops were accelerating downward at terminal velocity. When this column of descending air, a microburst weather phenomenon that meteorologists had been warning about since 1975, hit the ground, it would spread outward in all directions at speeds exceeding 70 miles per hour. Any aircraft flying through this invisible avalanche of air would experience the aerodynamic equivalent of having its wings ripped off. Captain Edward Connors, 57 years old, 29,000 hours of flight time, was cleared for approach to runway 17 left. First Officer Rudolph Price Jr., 42, former Air Force pilot, monitored the instruments. Flight engineer Nicholas Nasick, 43, scanned his panel. Flight 191 was 3 minutes from landing. None of them knew they were flying directly into the phenomenon that the Federal Aviation Administration had spent half a decade pretending didn't exist. The story of Delta 191 begins not in 1985, but in 1975, when Dr. Theodore Fujita, the University of Chicago meteorologist who had revolutionized tornado research, turned his attention to a series of unexplained aviation accidents. Fujita had noticed a pattern. Aircraft were crashing on approach or departure in thunderstorm conditions with no apparent cause. The planes weren't struck by lightning. They weren't icing up. They weren't experiencing mechanical failure. They were simply falling out of the sky. Eastern Airlines Flight 902. June 24, 1975. JFK Airport, New York. Boeing 727 approaching in thunderstorm conditions. The aircraft suddenly dropped, struck approach lights, and crashed short of the runway. 113 people died. Fujita obtained weather radar data from that day. He studied wind patterns. He interviewed survivors. He analyzed wreckage distribution. And he discovered something that would change meteorology forever. But that aviation authorities would refuse to believe for another decade. He called them microbursts. Columns of descending air, typically less than 2.5 miles in diameter, that hit the ground and spread outward with devastating force. An aircraft flying through a microburst would first encounter strong headwinds, increasing lift and altitude. Pilots would instinctively reduce power. Then, in seconds, the aircraft would pass into the downdraft itself, losing hundreds of feet of altitude. Finally, it would hit the tailwind on the far side, collapsing lift entirely. The whole event lasted 10 to 15 seconds. Not enough time for pilots to recognize what was happening. Not enough time to add full power. Not enough time to escape. Fujita published his findings in 1976. He presented to the National Transportation Safety Board. He briefed the Federal Aviation Administration. He showed him the weather patterns. He explained the physics. He demonstrated that microbursts had caused multiple fatal crashes. The FAA's response was institutional skepticism bordering on contempt. Donald Engine, FAA administrator from 1984 to 1987, later admitted in testimony before Congress. And this is a direct quote from the official record. We were told by our technical staff that microbursts were theoretical constructs. That Dr. Fujita was extrapolating from limited data. That the cost of detection systems, estimated at $15 million per major airport, could not be justified for a phenomenon that might not actually exist in operationally significant numbers. $15 million. Spread across 30 major airports. $450 million total. The FAA had decided that proving microbursts existed wasn't worth $500 million. But meteorologists kept finding them. Between 1977 and 1985, researchers documented over 1,600 microburst events at airports across the United States. They developed detection methodologies. They created warning protocols. They begged aviation authorities to take action. Dr. Fujita testified before Congress in 1982. His statement, preserved in the congressional record, included this warning, verbatim from his prepared testimony. Every major airport in the United States experiences multiple microburst events annually. Most occur without incident because no aircraft happens to be in the affected area. But the statistical probability of a catastrophic encounter increases with every delayed year of inaction. It is not a question of whether a major microburst accident will occur. It is a question of when and how many will die. The FAA's response was to fund additional study. Not detection systems. Not warning equipment. More study. Airlines were on their own. Some, like Pan Am and United, began training pilots to recognize microburst conditions. They taught the warning signs: sudden airspeed fluctuations, rapid altitude changes, visible rain curtains moving across the approach path. They drilled escape procedures: full throttle, maximum climb angle, accept the stall warning if necessary because terrain impact was certain death. Delta Airlines provided minimal microburst training. Their operations manual, reviewed after the accident, contained exactly one paragraph about wind shear. It did not mention microbursts by name. It did not describe recognition criteria. It did not specify escape procedures. Captain Connors had received approximately 15 minutes of wind shear instruction during his entire career. August 2, 1985. 2:35 p.m. local time. Delta Flight 191, originating from Fort Lauderdale, began its descent into Dallas-Fort Worth. 152 passengers. 11 crew members. The aircraft was a Boeing 727-200. Registration November 473 Delta Alpha. The weather was deteriorating. Thunderstorms were building north of the airport. But conditions were well within operating limits. Visibility was adequate. Wind was manageable. Dozens of aircraft had landed successfully that afternoon. At 2:47 p.m., Delta 191 was cleared for approach. Captain Connors was flying. First Officer Price was handling communications. They were on the instrument landing system for runway 17 left, a north-facing runway that would take them directly under the developing thunderstorm cell. The cockpit voice recorder, recovered from the wreckage and transcribed by the NTSB, preserved the final moments. The transcript is publicly available. What follows is taken directly from that official document. 2:50 p.m. and 43 seconds. Price: we're gonna get our airplane washed. Connors: yep. They were joking about flying through rain. Standard banter. Nothing seemed wrong. 2:51 p.m. and 19 seconds. Price: lightning coming out of that one. Connors: where? Price: right ahead of us. 2:51 and 43 seconds. An air traffic controller transmitted to another aircraft: Delta 1042, understand you're on the go-around. The other Delta flight had aborted its landing. They'd encountered severe turbulence on approach. They were climbing out. They were less than 2 minutes ahead of Flight 191 on the same approach path. The controller did not inform Flight 191 that the aircraft ahead had gone around. He did not warn him about severe turbulence. He did not suggest they might want to delay their approach. This failure to communicate would become a major finding in the NTSB investigation. 2:52 p.m. and 47 seconds. Flight 191 was at 800 feet, descending normally, airspeed 155 knots. The aircraft entered visible precipitation. Heavy rain began hammering the windscreen. 2:53 and 8 seconds. Price. Stuff is moving in. 2:53 and 18 seconds. The aircraft suddenly decelerated. Airspeed dropped from 155 knots to 149 knots in less than 3 seconds. They'd hit the headwind. The leading edge of the microburst. The wall of air moving toward them at 70 miles per hour. The autothrottle, sensing the airspeed loss, began adding power. But the system was calibrated for normal wind conditions. It couldn't add power fast enough to compensate for what was happening. 2:53 and 23 seconds. Connors. That's it. He'd felt something wrong. The aircraft's behavior wasn't normal. But he didn't know what he was experiencing. He'd never encountered a microburst. His training hadn't prepared him for this. 2:53 and 25 seconds. An alarm sounded. The ground proximity warning system. Whoop whoop. Pull up. Whoop whoop. Pull up. They were 770 feet above the ground. They shouldn't have been getting terrain warnings. Something was catastrophically wrong. 2:53 and 28 seconds. Price. Push it up. 2:53 and 30 seconds. Connors advanced the throttles. But the Boeing 727's engines, Pratt & Whitney JT8D turbofans, required approximately 8 seconds to spool from approach power to takeoff thrust. They didn't have 8 seconds. The aircraft had passed through the headwind and entered the downdraft. The core of the microburst. Air was descending at 6,000 feet per minute, 100 feet per second. The aircraft, already low and slow, was being pushed toward the ground with force equivalent to doubling its weight. 2:53 and 33 seconds. The stick shaker activated. The control column began vibrating violently, warning of an impending stall. The aircraft was approaching minimum flying speed. 2:53 and 35 seconds. Price. Toga. Takeoff go around. The emergency procedure. Full power. Maximum climb. Abort the landing. 2:53 and 38 seconds. Connors. Toga. He slammed the throttles to maximum. He pulled back on the control column. He was doing everything right. Everything his training had taught him. It wasn't enough. At 2:53 and 41 seconds, the aircraft was descending at 2,500 feet per minute despite full power and maximum pitch attitude. It was aerodynamically impossible. The laws of physics said this shouldn't be happening. But microbursts don't care about what should be possible. 2:53 and 44 seconds. Price. Push it way up. 2:53 and 46 seconds. Connors. I'm pushing. 2:53 and 48 seconds. The aircraft was at 220 feet above the ground. Airspeed had collapsed to 119 knots. The stick shaker was screaming. The ground proximity alarm was howling. The engines were at full power but they were still descending. 2:53 and 50 seconds. The left wing struck the ground. The aircraft was traveling at approximately 170 miles per hour when it hit. But it wasn't on the runway. It was 3,500 feet short, over Texas State Highway 114, a busy 4-lane road running parallel to the airport. William Mayberry, age 28, was driving his Toyota Celica northbound on Highway 114. He was on his way home from work. He never saw the aircraft. The Boeing 727's left wing, still carrying thousands of pounds of fuel, struck Mayberry's car directly. The impact was instantaneous. The car exploded. Mayberry died immediately. He became the 138th fatality of Delta Flight 191, the only ground casualty. The wing strike caused the aircraft to cartwheel. The left wing separated. The fuselage rotated counterclockwise. The tail struck the ground. The aircraft was now tumbling, breaking apart, scattering debris across a quarter-mile of Texas landscape. 2 water tanks, each containing thousands of gallons, stood between the highway and the runway. Delta 191 hit both of them. The cockpit voice recorder captured one final sound at 2:53 and 56 seconds. A brief, sharp noise. Then silence. The recorder had been destroyed. The fuselage continued forward, now completely engulfed in fire. Jet fuel from ruptured tanks had ignited. The flames were fed by oxygen from the pressurization system. The cabin became an inferno. The aircraft came to rest 800 feet from the initial impact point. The wreckage was barely recognizable as an airplane. The cockpit had separated. The wings were gone. The tail had torn off. The fuselage had split into multiple sections. From first impact to final rest, 7 seconds. Airport fire trucks were moving within 30 seconds. The crash had occurred on airport property. Firefighters had seen the aircraft go down. They knew exactly where it was. Fire Captain Jim Beasley was first on scene. His testimony to the NTSB, given 3 days after the accident, described what he found. This is from the official investigation report. The forward fuselage section was intact but fully involved in fire. Flames were coming from every window. The heat was intense enough that we couldn't approach closer than 50 feet. We could hear screaming from inside. People were trapped. We knew they were dying and there was nothing we could do. The fire was too hot. We didn't have enough water pressure. We were watching people burn to death. Firefighter Dennis Nielsen, also responding in the first wave, described the approach to the crash site in his official statement. From NTSB witness interviews, we were staged at the North Fire Station when we got the call. Aircraft down on the approach end. We could see the black smoke immediately. It was massive. By the time we reached the scene, maybe 90 seconds, the entire fuselage was burning. There were people wandering around in shock. Some were on fire and didn't even know it. We had to tackle them, roll them on the ground to put out the flames. One woman was walking in circles, completely calm, asking where her husband was. She had third-degree burns on her arms and face. She was in shock. She didn't feel anything. Motorists on Highway 114 witnessed the impact. Michael Steinberg, driving southbound, saw the aircraft strike the ground. From his statement to DFW Airport Police, I saw the plane coming down. It wasn't gliding. It was falling. The wings were level but it was just dropping out of the sky. I thought maybe it was doing some kind of maneuver but then I realized it was going to hit the highway. I slammed on my brakes. The plane hit maybe 200 feet in front of me. There was this huge explosion. Orange and black. The fireball went up at least 200 feet. Debris was flying everywhere. A piece of metal hit my windshield and I couldn't see. I pulled over and got out. There were car parts and airplane parts all over the road. And then I saw the body. Just lying there in the road. That's when I knew this was real. That body was William Mayberry. still strapped in the driver's seat of his Toyota Celica. The vehicle had been essentially vaporized by the wing impact. Dallas County Medical Examiner Charles Petty noted in his autopsy report. From official medical examiner records, the victim died of massive blunt force trauma consistent with aircraft impact. Death was instantaneous. The victim was identified through dental records as physical identification was not possible. News crews arrived within minutes. Tracy Rowlett, anchor for WFAA TV Dallas, was on air when the bulletin came through. The station's archive footage, now publicly available, shows Rowlett breaking the news at 3:07 p.m. From archived broadcast transcript, we have breaking news from Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. We're getting reports of a commercial aircraft crash. Details are very sketchy right now, but we're told a Delta Airlines flight has crashed on approach to the airport. We don't know the number of people on board. We're sending crews to the scene now. We'll bring you more information as soon as we have it. By 3:30 p.m., television stations were broadcasting live from the crash site. Reporter Brad Hawkins of KXAS-TV provided one of the first eyewitness accounts on live television. From archived broadcast, I'm standing about 300 yards from the wreckage of what we now know is Delta Flight 191. Behind me you can see the smoke. The fire is still burning. Emergency crews are all over this area. There are ambulances everywhere. We've seen them bringing survivors out, but I have to tell you, there don't appear to be many. This is a devastating scene. The aircraft is completely destroyed. It looks like it broke into several pieces. Rescue workers are still searching through the wreckage, but at this point it appears that most of the people on board did not survive. 27 passengers and crew members died in the initial impact. Most in the forward cabin where the structure had collapsed. Their deaths were instantaneous. 83 more died in the fire that followed. Trapped in their seats. Unable to escape. Killed by smoke inhalation and burns while rescuers watched helplessly from yards away. But 29 people survived. Most were seated in the rear of the aircraft. The tail section had separated on impact but remained relatively intact. The breakup that killed so many forward passengers had created an escape path for those in back. Wendy Robinson, flight attendant, age 27, was working the rear galley. She survived with severe injuries. Her account, given to investigators from her hospital bed, explained how anyone got out alive. From the NTSB survivor interview transcripts, the aircraft hit and everything went black. When I opened my eyes I was on the ground outside. I'd been thrown from the wreckage. I could see the fire. I could hear people screaming. I tried to stand but my legs wouldn't work. I crawled toward the voices. There were other people crawling too. Some were on fire. Some were trying to help. A man was pulling people from a hole in the fuselage. He was burned but he kept going back in. He saved at least 5 people before he collapsed. That man was identified as Jack Brown, passenger, age 32, seated in row 33. He suffered third-degree burns over 60% of his body pulling other passengers from the burning wreckage. He survived. He spent 11 months in the hospital. He never fully recovered but he lived. Passenger Karen Larson, seated in row 31, survived with serious injuries. Her account, recorded by NTSB investigators on August 5, described the final seconds. From official NTSB survivor interviews, we were descending normally. I was reading a magazine. Then the plane started shaking. Not turbulence. Something different. Violent. The pilot added power. I could hear the engines getting louder. Then we hit. Everything went black. When I woke up I was outside the plane. I don't know how I got there. My leg was broken. I could see fire everywhere. There were people screaming. Some people were running away from the plane. Some people were running toward it trying to help. A man grabbed me and dragged me further away. He said the plane might explode. I turned around and saw a woman trapped in a seat. She was screaming for help. The man went back for her, but the fire was too intense. He couldn't reach her. We had to listen to her screaming until she stopped. Flight attendant Wendy Robinson, working the rear galley, managed to help evacuate passengers from the tail section before collapsing from her injuries. Her extended NTSB interview provides additional detail. From NTSB survivor testimony. My training took over. I didn't think. I just acted. The tail section was separated but intact. There was a hole in the fuselage maybe 4 feet wide. People were trapped in their seats. Some were unconscious. Some were screaming. I started unbuckling seat belts and pushing people toward the hole. Someone outside was pulling them out. I got maybe 7 or 8 people out before my legs gave out. I couldn't feel them anymore. I found out later my back was broken in 3 places. But at the moment I didn't feel anything. The adrenaline was too strong. Dr. Michael Sabia, trauma surgeon at Parkland Memorial Hospital, received the first survivors at 3:15 p.m. His interview with the Dallas Morning News 2 days after the crash described the medical response. From August 4th newspaper interview. We activated our mass casualty protocol immediately. We cleared operating rooms. We called in off-duty staff. The first ambulances arrived within minutes. The injuries were catastrophic. Severe burns. Traumatic amputations. Crush injuries. These weren't survivable accidents. These were people who had survived the unsurvivable and were now fighting for their lives. We worked on them for hours. Some made it. Some didn't. I've been a trauma surgeon for 15 years. I've seen car wrecks, industrial accidents, everything. This was different. The scale of it. The severity. 29 survivors came to us. 6 died in the hospital over the next 48 hours. 23 made it. But many of them will never fully recover. Patricia Stewart, passenger, age 44, was traveling with her 2 teenage daughters. She survived. One daughter survived with minor injuries. The other daughter, Jennifer Stewart, age 16, died in the fire. Patricia's testimony to the NTSB, given 2 weeks after the crash, remains one of the most heartbreaking survivor accounts. From NTSB family interviews. We were sitting together. Row 27. Jennifer had the window. Sarah had the middle. I had the aisle. When we hit, Jennifer's seat broke loose. She was thrown forward. I grabbed for her but I couldn't reach her. Sarah and I were still strapped in. There was smoke everywhere. I got Sarah unbuckled. We crawled toward the back. I kept calling for Jennifer. I could hear her voice. She was calling for me. But I couldn't see her. The smoke was too thick. Sarah and I got out through a hole in the fuselage. I tried to go back for Jennifer. A firefighter stopped me. He said the fire was too intense. He said nobody could survive in there. But I could still hear her calling for me. I heard her voice for maybe 30 seconds. Then I didn't hear it anymore. Sarah Stewart, age 14, also provided testimony. Her account describes the immediate aftermath. From NTSB witness statements. After we got out, Mom kept trying to go back. People had to hold her. She was screaming Jennifer's name. I was in shock, I think. I just sat on the ground. There were bodies everywhere. Some people were moving. Some weren't. A lady was sitting next to me. She wasn't burned or anything. She looked fine. But she wasn't breathing. A paramedic came over and checked her. He shook his head and covered her with a blanket. That's when I understood that most of the people didn't make it. By 3 p.m., 7 minutes after the crash, the fire was contained. By 3:30 p.m. it was extinguished. By 4 p.m., emergency crews were beginning the grim work of body recovery. The Dallas County Medical Examiner's Office had never handled a disaster of this magnitude. Chief Medical Examiner Charles Petty activated the office's mass casualty plan. His statement to the press on August 3 explained the challenge. From official press conference transcript, we have 137 victims. Many are badly burned. Physical identification will be impossible in most cases. We will be using dental records, fingerprints where available, and personal effects. We are asking families to provide us with any medical or dental records they have. This process will take time. We ask for patience. We will identify every victim, but it will take days, possibly weeks. The identification process was handled at a temporary morgue established in Hangar 6 at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. Dr. Linda Norton, forensic pathologist assisting with the identifications, later described the work in a medical journal article. From Journal of Forensic Sciences, 1987. The thermal damage was extensive. Many victims were burned beyond recognition. We worked 12-hour shifts for 9 days straight. Each victim was photographed, fingerprinted if possible, dentally examined, and catalogued. Personal effects were carefully documented. Wedding rings, watches, anything that might help families identify their loved ones. By August 11, we had identified 135 of the 137 victims. The final 2 identifications took another week. News coverage of the disaster dominated national media for days. The New York Times front page on August 3 carried the headline. Actual New York Times headline, August 3, 1985. Jetliner crashes in Dallas, killing 133. The initial death toll was later revised upward as more victims died from injuries. CBS Evening News anchor Dan Rather opened his broadcast on August 2 with this statement. From CBS News Archives. Good evening. A Delta Airlines jumbo jet crashed today while attempting to land at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport in Texas. Early reports indicate at least 130 people are dead. This is one of the worst air disasters in American history. CBS News correspondent Bob Schieffer is at the scene. Schieffer's report, filed from the crash site, provided national television audiences with their first detailed look at the disaster. From CBS broadcast transcript, the wreckage is spread over a quarter-mile of flat Texas prairie. The main fuselage section is still smoking. Fire trucks are pouring water on hot spots. Emergency workers are still searching through the debris. Officials here say they do not expect to find any more survivors. The death toll now stands at 133, with that number expected to rise. Investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board are already on scene. They'll be trying to determine what caused this aircraft to fall from the sky on what should have been a routine landing. President Ronald Reagan issued a statement from the White House at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. From official White House press release, Nancy and I are deeply saddened by the tragedy at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. Our thoughts and prayers are with the victims, their families, and the survivors. I have directed the full resources of the federal government to assist in the investigation and recovery efforts. We will determine what caused this accident and take whatever steps are necessary to prevent such tragedies in the future. Delta Airlines CEO Ronald Allen arrived at Dallas-Fort Worth by midnight. His press conference on the morning of August 3 was broadcast live nationwide. From press conference transcript, this is the darkest day in Delta's history. We have lost valued employees and passengers who trusted us with their safety. We are cooperating fully with the NTSB investigation. We are making counselors available to families. We are taking care of all funeral arrangements at company expense. But nothing we can do will bring these people back. Nothing can ease the pain their families are feeling. We are devastated. Final toll: 137 dead. 29 survivors, most seriously injured. 166 lives destroyed because the FAA had decided that microburst detection wasn't worth the investment. The National Transportation Safety Board investigation began immediately. Lead investigator John Lauber arrived at Dallas-Fort Worth by 7 p.m. that evening. His team worked through the night. By dawn they had located both black boxes, the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder. Lauber's preliminary assessment, recorded in his investigator's notes from August 3, showed immediate recognition of what had occurred. From NTSB investigation files, weather radar shows classic microburst signature. Wind data indicates extreme shear event. Surface winds shifted 180 degrees in under 10 seconds. This is precisely the scenario Dr. Fujita has been warning about for a decade. This accident was predictable. It was preventable. And it will happen again unless systemic changes are implemented immediately. NTSB investigator Greg Faith, who would later become one of the board's most prominent air safety experts, was assigned to the structures group. His examination of the wreckage revealed critical information. From NTSB investigative report, the aircraft broke apart on ground impact, not in flight. The wing separation was due to ground contact forces, not aerodynamic overload. This indicates the aircraft was intact until it hit the highway. The crew maintained control until the very end. They were fighting to save the aircraft. The flight data recorder shows they did everything correctly. Full power. Maximum pitch. They executed a textbook wind shear escape procedure. It just wasn't enough against the forces they encountered. The families of the flight crew members also testified during the NTSB hearings. Mary Connors, widow of Captain Edward Connors, made a statement that resonated throughout the aviation community. From NTSB public hearing transcript, my husband was a careful pilot. A professional. He had 29,000 hours of experience. He had survived emergencies before. If he couldn't save that aircraft, it's because the situation was beyond human capability to overcome. Don't blame him. Don't blame the crew. Blame the system that sent them into conditions they couldn't detect and couldn't survive. Edward died doing everything right. He deserves better than to be second-guessed by people who have never faced what he faced in those final seconds. First Officer Price's father, Rudolph Price Sr., a retired military pilot, also addressed the board. From hearing transcript, my son was former Air Force. He flew combat missions in Vietnam. He knew how to handle emergencies. But you can't handle what you can't see. You can't escape from a phenomenon you haven't been trained to recognize. The FAA failed these pilots. They failed the passengers. They failed everyone on that aircraft by refusing to install detection equipment that could have warned them what they were flying into. The flight data recorder was critical. It showed everything. Airspeed, altitude, engine power, control inputs. The data painted a clear picture of what had happened. At 2:53 and 18 seconds, the aircraft had encountered a 50-knot headwind. 3 seconds later, that headwind had reversed to a 40-knot tailwind. The total wind shift, 90 knots, had occurred in less than 10 seconds. The downdraft data was even more damning. At maximum, the aircraft had experienced a 6,000 feet per minute descent rate from external forces. Not because the pilots pushed the nose down. Not because the engines failed. Because air was pushing the aircraft toward the ground with irresistible force. Dr. Fujita was invited to examine the meteorological data. He analyzed Doppler radar returns from the Dallas-Fort Worth terminal radar. He studied surface wind sensors. He reviewed pilot reports from other aircraft. His conclusion, presented to the NTSB on August 8, just 6 days after the crash, was unequivocal. From the official NTSB meteorological analysis, Delta Flight 191 encountered a classic microburst. The event was textbook in every regard. The meteorological conditions were ideal for microburst formation. The radar data shows the characteristic descending reflectivity core. The wind measurements confirm the outflow pattern. This was an entirely predictable phenomenon. It could have been detected with available technology. It could have been avoided with proper warning systems. The air traffic controllers working that afternoon also testified before the NTSB. Jesse Bowles, the controller handling Delta 191, was placed on administrative leave immediately after the accident. His testimony, given under oath on August 20, revealed the gaps in communication. From NTSB hearing transcripts, Delta 1042 reported severe wind shear and went around. That was at approximately 2:50 p.m. I knew they had encountered something significant. But I was handling multiple aircraft. Delta 191 was already on final approach. I didn't think to warn them. In hindsight, I should have. But at the time, wind shear reports were common. We got them all the time. Most aircraft pushed through without problems. I didn't realize how severe the conditions were. If I had known, I would have sent him around. But I didn't know. Tower Supervisor George Webb testified about the lack of wind shear detection equipment. From NTSB testimony, we had no way to detect microbursts. We relied on pilot reports. If a pilot reported wind shear, we would pass that information to following aircraft. But there was no requirement to issue a formal warning. No protocol for delaying approaches. It was left to pilot discretion. We had been asking the FAA for wind shear detection equipment for years. We were told it was too expensive. We were told the technology wasn't mature. We were told to make do with what we had. Well, what we had wasn't enough. Paramedic Robert Chen was one of the first medical responders on scene. His report, filed with Dallas Fire Rescue, documents the triage challenge. From official DFR incident report, we arrived at 3:04 p.m. The scene was chaotic. Fire was still active. Survivors were scattered across a wide area. We began immediate triage. Red tags for critical. Yellow tags for serious. Green tags for walking wounded. Black tags for deceased. The problem was most of the people we found were already deceased. We tagged maybe 50 bodies in the first 10 minutes. The survivors were mostly from the tail section. We got them stabilized and transported as quickly as possible. But the survival rate was low. Very low. Emergency medical technician Susan Hardwick described treating survivors. From witness statements to NTSB, the burn victims were the worst. Full-thickness burns over large areas of their bodies. We had to be careful moving them because their skin would literally come off in our hands. One man was conscious and talking. He kept asking about his wife. We found her still in the wreckage. She didn't make it. He died 2 days later in the hospital. Another woman was in shock. She was holding a child's shoe. Just holding it and staring at it. We found out later her daughter died in the fire. The psychological trauma was as severe as the physical injuries. Dallas police officer James Martinez was directing traffic on Highway 114 when the aircraft struck. His testimony provides additional detail about the ground impact. From DPD incident reports, I saw the plane coming in low. Too low. I thought maybe it was an emergency landing on the highway. Then I saw it wasn't under control. It hit the Toyota and just disintegrated. Parts flying everywhere. I called it in immediately. Code 3. Aircraft down. Multiple casualties. Then I ran toward the wreckage. There were people trapped in the burning fuselage. We tried to get to them, but the heat was too intense. We couldn't get within 50 feet. All we could do was watch and wait for fire crews. The FAA could no longer deny reality. The evidence was overwhelming. The physics were undeniable. Microbursts existed. They were deadly. And the agency had spent 10 years ignoring them. But the FAA wasn't done making excuses. In testimony before the NTSB on August 15, FAA official Thomas McSweeney argued that, "This is from the official hearing transcript. While we acknowledge that this accident was caused by microburst wind shear, we must note that such events are rare and unpredictable. The costs of implementing detection systems at all major airports would be prohibitive. We believe that enhanced pilot training represents a more cost-effective approach to this problem." More training. That was the FAA's solution. Teach pilots to recognize and escape from a meteorological phenomenon that occurred in less than 10 seconds and generated forces that exceeded aircraft performance capabilities. The NTSB rejected this argument completely. On August 16, 1985, just 2 weeks after the crash, the NTSB issued urgent safety recommendations to the FAA. The recommendations, classified as immediate action required, included: install low-level wind shear alert systems at all major airports immediately. Develop and deploy Doppler radar systems capable of detecting microburst formation. Require all air carriers to provide comprehensive wind shear training including microburst recognition and escape procedures. Mandate that pilots be informed immediately when wind shear or microburst conditions are reported by other aircraft. The FAA's initial response was to promise further study. Congress was less patient. Representative James Oberstar, chairman of the House Aviation Subcommittee, convened emergency hearings in September 1985. The hearings were brutal. FAA officials were forced to explain why they had ignored 10 years of warnings, why they had dismissed Dr. Fujita's research, why they had prioritized cost savings over passenger safety. The transcript of those hearings makes for devastating reading. At one point, Oberstar asked FAA Administrator Donald Engine directly, from the congressional hearing record, how many people have to die before the FAA takes action on a known hazard? We have 137 dead in Dallas. We had 113 dead in New York in '75. We've had multiple other incidents. At what point does the body count become high enough to justify spending money on detection systems? Engine's response was evasive. Also from the official record, we are committed to aviation safety. We take every accident seriously. We are reviewing all available technologies and will make recommendations based on sound engineering and economic analysis. Oberstar's response was withering. Verbatim from the transcript, 137 people are dead because the FAA decided that economic analysis was more important than passenger safety. That is unacceptable. This committee will not allow the FAA to study this problem to death while more Americans die. Congress didn't wait for the FAA to act. In December 1985, they passed legislation mandating wind shear detection systems at major airports. The bill included specific deadlines. The FAA was given 2 years to implement low-level wind shear alert systems at the 30 busiest airports. The bill appropriated funds. The FAA had no more excuses. The airline pilot unions responded to the tragedy with their own demands. Captain Henry Duffy, president of the Airline Pilots Association, testified before Congress in October 1985. From congressional hearing record, Our pilots have been flying blind into wind shear conditions for years. We have begged the FAA for better detection equipment. We have asked for enhanced training. We have requested mandatory go-around procedures when wind shear is reported. We have been told repeatedly that these measures are too expensive or technically infeasible. Now 137 people are dead because the FAA was more concerned about costs than safety. This is unacceptable. Our pilots deserve better. Our passengers deserve better. The flying public deserves an aviation system that prioritizes safety over economics. United Airlines Captain Al Haynes, who would later become famous for his heroic handling of United Flight 232 in Sioux City, was serving on the ALPA Safety Committee in 1985. His statement to the committee, circulated widely among pilots, expressed the frustration many felt. From ALPA Safety Bulletin: every pilot knows about microbursts now. We've read the accident reports. We've studied Dr. Fujita's research. We know what we're up against. But knowledge alone isn't enough when you're at 200 feet on final approach and suddenly you're descending at 2,000 feet per minute despite full power. We need detection. We need warnings. We need time to react. The technology exists. Installing it is a choice. The FAA has chosen not to install it. That choice has consequences. Delta 191 is the consequence. How many more consequences will we accept before we demand action? Boeing, manufacturer of the 727, issued a statement defending the aircraft's design. From Boeing press release, August 5, 1985, the 727 performed as designed under extreme conditions beyond normal operating parameters. The aircraft structure remained intact through initial ground contact. The flight controls remained functional throughout the event. No mechanical defect contributed to this accident. This was a weather-related event that exceeded the performance capabilities of any aircraft currently in service. That statement, while technically accurate, infuriated many in the aviation safety community. John Gallipold, president of the Aviation Safety Institute, responded publicly. From Industry Journal Aviation Week, August 12, 1985, Boeing is correct that the aircraft performed as designed. But the aviation system failed. We are sending aircraft into conditions we know are deadly, without giving pilots the tools to detect those conditions. This is systemic negligence. Every organization involved, the FAA, the airlines, the manufacturers, shares responsibility for creating an environment where profit margins matter more than passenger lives. Technology moved faster than bureaucracy. In 1986, the first terminal Doppler weather radar systems were installed at select airports. These systems could detect microburst formation before aircraft entered the affected area. Controllers could warn pilots. Approaches could be delayed. Lives could be saved. The first operational save came on July 11, 1988. Charlotte Douglas International Airport. A thunderstorm cell was developing north of the field. The terminal Doppler weather radar detected a microburst forming along the approach path to runway 36. Air traffic control immediately issued warnings. 3 aircraft on approach were directed to go around. One was United Flight 706, a Boeing 737 with 143 passengers. The captain of Flight 706 later reported that as they climbed away from the airport, they encountered severe turbulence and rapid airspeed fluctuations consistent with microburst conditions. If they had continued the approach, they would have been at low altitude and low speed when they hit the core of the microburst. The terminal Doppler weather radar had saved 143 lives. By 1994, 47 major airports had terminal Doppler weather radar systems operational. Between 1988 and 2005, these systems were credited with preventing an estimated 62 potential wind shear accidents. Airlines weren't waiting for the FAA either. After Delta 191, carriers began installing onboard wind shear detection systems. These systems used computer algorithms to analyze airspeed and altitude changes in real time. If the aircraft encountered microburst conditions, the system would alert pilots immediately and display the optimal escape procedure. By 1990, most commercial aircraft were equipped with these systems. By 2000, they were mandatory on all commercial jets. Pilot training was revolutionized. Wind shear escape procedures became a mandatory part of type rating training for every commercial aircraft. Pilots practiced microburst encounters in simulators. They learned the warning signs. They drilled the recovery procedures until they became instinctive. The results were dramatic. Between 1964 and 1985, wind shear and microbursts were listed as causal or contributing factors in 26 fatal airline accidents in the United States alone. Those accidents killed over 600 people. Between 1986 and 2024, a span of 38 years, there has been exactly one fatal airline accident in the United States attributed to wind shear. U.S. Air Flight 1016 in 1994, which crashed during an aborted landing at Charlotte. But even that accident occurred during the transition period when not all airports had modern detection systems installed. Since 2000, when full implementation was achieved, 0 fatal wind shear accidents in the United States. 0. The technology works. The training works. The warnings work. But the human cost of delayed implementation extends far beyond the 137 who died on August 2, 1985. The survivors carried their own burden. Karen Larson, whose account of watching a woman burn to death while trapped in the wreckage was recorded by the NTSB, gave a follow-up interview 10 years after the crash. From Dallas Morning News 10th anniversary coverage. I can't fly anymore. I've tried. Multiple times. The therapists tell me it's irrational. They tell me flying is statistically safer than driving. They're right. But statistics don't matter when you've lived through what I lived through. The sound of jet engines triggers panic attacks. The smell of smoke makes me physically ill. I lost more than my leg in that crash. I lost my freedom. I lost the ability to travel. I lost a piece of my mind that I'll never get back. Dr. Sarah Gallagher, clinical psychologist specializing in trauma, studied Delta 191 survivors for her doctoral dissertation in 1992. Her findings were published in the Journal of Traumatic Stress. From published research, survivors of catastrophic aviation accidents experience PTSD rates exceeding 70%. Many develop additional comorbid conditions including depression, anxiety disorders, and substance abuse issues. The psychological damage is often more debilitating than physical injuries. Of the 29 survivors of Delta 191, only 11 were able to fly again within 5 years. 6 never flew again. 3 required psychiatric hospitalization for severe PTSD. The economic and personal costs extend decades beyond the event itself. Sarah Stewart, who survived at age 14 while her sister Jennifer died, spoke publicly for the first time at the 20th anniversary memorial service in 2005. From memorial service recording. I'm 34 years old now. I have a daughter. She's 9. She'll never meet her aunt. She'll never know Jennifer. My mother never recovered. She's alive, but she's not really living. She exists. That's the best word for it. She exists in a world where her daughter died screaming her name while she stood outside unable to save her. That's what this crash took. Not just the 137 who died that day, but pieces of everyone who survived. Pieces of every family member. Pieces of everyone who responded. We're all casualties. Some of us just kept breathing. Fire Captain Jim Beasley retired from Dallas Fire Rescue in 1998. In his retirement interview, he reflected on August 2, 1985. From DFR Newsletter, I've been to hundreds of emergencies. House fires. Car wrecks. Industrial accidents. You learn to compartmentalize. You do your job and you move on. But Delta 191 is different. I still hear the screaming. 20 years later, I can still hear it. People trapped in that fuselage calling for help while we stood there with hoses and foam and couldn't do a damn thing. The heat was too intense. We would have died if we'd gone in. Intellectually, I know that. But it doesn't stop the nightmares. It doesn't stop the guilt. We were trained to save lives. And we had to watch people die. If these systems had been in place on August 2, 1985, Delta Flight 191 would have been warned about the microburst. Captain Connors would have delayed his approach. The aircraft would have landed safely 15 minutes later after the storm cell passed. 137 people would have lived. In 1997, the families of Delta 191 victims established a memorial at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. The memorial includes a black granite wall inscribed with the names of all 137 victims. Above the names is a bronze plaque with an inscription. This is the actual text from the memorial. In memory of those who died aboard Delta Flight 191, August 2, 1985. Their deaths led to safety improvements that have saved countless lives. They are gone but not forgotten. The memorial dedication ceremony, held on August 2, 1997, exactly 12 years after the crash, was attended by over 300 family members. Reverend Robert Wright, who lost his wife and 2 children in the crash, spoke at the ceremony. From Dedication Ceremony Transcript. We gather here not just to mourn, but to remember. To remember that these were not just names on a passenger list. They were mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, husbands and wives, friends and colleagues. They had dreams. They had plans. They had futures that were stolen from them in 7 seconds. But their deaths were not meaningless. The changes that came after this tragedy have saved thousands of lives. That is their legacy. That is how we honor them. Patricia Stewart, who lost her daughter Jennifer in the crash, also spoke. From Memorial Dedication. For 12 years I have asked myself why Jennifer died. Why my daughter was taken when she had her whole life ahead of her. I don't have an answer. But I know that her death, and the deaths of 136 others, forced changes that have prevented other families from experiencing this pain. Every time I hear that another wind shear warning has prevented an accident, I think of Jennifer. I think that maybe her death meant something. That maybe she saved someone else's daughter. That's what keeps me going. Jack Brown, the passenger who pulled survivors from the burning wreckage, attended the dedication. By 1997, he had undergone 32 reconstructive surgeries for his burn injuries. He told reporters. From Dallas Morning News coverage of Memorial Dedication. I don't remember much about the crash itself. Just flashes. What I remember is afterward. Hearing people screaming. Knowing they were dying. Knowing I had to do something. I pulled out everyone I could reach. But there were so many more I couldn't save. I hear their voices sometimes. At night. The ones who were too far in. The ones the fire got. This memorial is for them. The ones who didn't make it. They deserve to be remembered. Wendy Robinson, the flight attendant who helped evacuate passengers despite a broken back, never returned to flying. In an interview for the memorial dedication, she explained. From newspaper interview. I tried to go back. I completed physical therapy. I was medically cleared. But the first time I walked onto an aircraft, I had a panic attack. I couldn't breathe. I had to get off. I loved my job. I loved being a flight attendant. But I couldn't do it anymore. Every time I smelled jet fuel or heard engines, I was back there. Back in the burning wreckage. Watching people die. PTSD, they call it. I call it the cost of surviving something you weren't supposed to survive. William Mayberry's name is included on that wall. The driver killed when the aircraft struck his car. His family fought to have him recognized as a victim of the crash. They succeeded. He's remembered alongside the passengers and crew. The memorial is located near the approach end of runway 17 left. The runway Delta 191 was trying to reach. Pilots flying into Dallas-Fort Worth passed directly over it. Some pilots report their position as over the Delta Memorial when communicating with controllers. It's an unofficial waypoint. A reminder. Dr. Theodore Fujita continued his research until his death in 1998. He never stopped studying severe weather. He never stopped trying to save lives through better understanding of atmospheric physics. In 2004, the American Meteorological Society established the Theodore Fujita Research Achievement Award. It's given annually to researchers who make significant contributions to severe weather understanding. The citation specifically mentions that Fujita's microburst research saved thousands of lives through improved aviation safety. The FAA officials who dismissed his warnings for a decade, they faced no consequences. No one was fired. No one was disciplined. The agency issued a formal apology in 1991, 6 years after the crash, acknowledging that they had failed to act on available information. That was it. In 2010, the NTSB released a retrospective analysis of aviation safety improvements since 1980. The report identified wind shear detection and warning systems as the single most effective safety enhancement in commercial aviation history. The systems have prevented more accidents and saved more lives than any other technological advancement in the past 40 years. The cost? Installing terminal Doppler weather radar systems at 47 major airports came to approximately $650 million spread over 10 years. Onboard detection systems cost approximately $50,000 per aircraft. In testimony before Congress in 2012, former NTSB investigator John Lauber, who had led the Delta 191 investigation, was asked whether this investment was justified. His response? From the congressional hearing record, we estimate that wind shear detection systems have prevented at least 60 fatal accidents that would otherwise have occurred. If we assume conservative average fatality numbers of 100 per accident, that's 6,000 lives saved. $650 million divided by 6,000 lives is approximately $100,000 per life saved. That's not just justified. That's one of the best investments in safety that has ever been made. But it didn't have to be an investment made in blood. Dr. Fujita warned them in 1975. He showed him the data. He explained the physics. He predicted that catastrophic accidents would continue until detection systems were installed. The FAA ignored him. 113 people died in 1975 when Eastern 802 crashed at JFK. The FAA called for more study. 137 people died in 1985 when Delta 191 crashed at Dallas-Fort Worth. Finally, Congress forced action. How many people died in the decade between? How many accidents occurred that could have been prevented? We'll never know the exact number. But we know the cost of the FAA's institutional skepticism was measured in hundreds of lives. Today, microburst detection is so reliable that pilots rarely encounter these phenomena without warning. The systems detect formation. Controllers issue advisories. Pilots delay approaches or choose alternate airports. It's routine. It's boring. It's exactly what aviation safety should be. But every pilot flying into Dallas-Fort Worth knows about Delta 191. It's part of their training. They learn about the accident. They see the weather data. They practice the escape procedures. They understand what happens when you fly into a microburst without warning. And when they pass over the memorial on approach to runway 17 left, some of them remember. This didn't have to happen. The technology existed. The knowledge existed. The warnings were given. The only thing missing was institutional willingness to spend money solving a problem that bureaucrats had decided wasn't real. Until 137 people proved them wrong. If you found this story valuable, please consider subscribing. We cover disasters that changed the world, and the institutional failures that made them inevitable. The Delta 191 story raises an uncomfortable question that echoes across decades of aviation history. How many times do experts have to be proven right before authorities listen? How high does the body count have to climb before cost-benefit analysis includes the value of human life? In the case of microbursts, the answer was at least 250 dead. That's how many people died in microburst-related accidents between Dr. Fujita's first warning in 1975 and the implementation of detection systems in 1988. 250 people dead because economic analysis concluded that their lives weren't worth the cost of radar systems. The final words on this story should come from Captain Edward Connors. Not his last words on the cockpit voice recorder, though those are preserved in the NTSB report. But his earlier words, spoken 6 months before his death, during a safety meeting at Delta Airlines. The meeting minutes were reviewed during the accident investigation. Captain Connors had raised concerns about wind shear training. He'd requested additional simulator time practicing wind shear escape procedures. His request was denied due to budget constraints. In the meeting, Captain Connors said, from the official meeting minutes archived at the NTSB, I've been flying for 30 years. I've never encountered wind shear conditions that exceeded aircraft performance. But I've read the accident reports. I know it's possible. I know pilots have died because they weren't prepared. If it can happen to them, it can happen to any of us. We need better training. We need better warning systems. We need the FAA to take this seriously before more people die. 6 months later, Captain Edward Connors died in a microburst at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. He was doing everything right. He followed his training. He executed the proper procedures. It wasn't enough because he was fighting a phenomenon that no one had prepared him to survive. 136 passengers and crew died with him. William Mayberry died on the highway below. They all died because bureaucrats had decided that Dr. Fujita's warnings were theoretical paranoia. Today, terminal Doppler weather radar systems stand guard at every major airport in America. They scan the skies continuously. They detect microburst formation. They save lives. They exist because on August 2, 1985, 137 people paid the price for a decade of institutional negligence. The FAA stopped calling microbursts theoretical paranoia. They started calling them a validated hazard requiring immediate technological countermeasures. The bureaucratic language changed. But the physics never did. Microbursts existed in 1975. They existed in 1985. They exist today. The only thing that changed was institutional willingness to acknowledge reality. And that change cost 137 lives.